session with the LNP Editorial Board. For the purposes of recording, we're going to introduce ourselves again. My name is Suzanne Cassidy. I am the opinion editor at LNP.
Suzanne.
Joe?
Joe
Go run
Haythauer,
through.
Deputy Opinion Editor.
Karen Shilley, Politics and Government Reporter.
Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Marshka, staff photographer.
Tom Merce, content editor.
And I'm Barbara Hofer, the Executive Editor.
Well, again, we welcome you to downtown Lancaster, and wondered if you would like to just begin with to talk for a couple of minutes about why you're in this race, and how you hope to represent the people of this district.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for doing this. And everybody watching, thank you for tuning in. I've really fallen in love with the city. To me, and Joe knows very well, my manager, Westchester in Chester County is a very cool town, and Lancaster City, to me, is just as nice, but at a much larger scale. So I've had a great time getting here in the last year during the campaign. If you had the opportunity to see the debate, you may have heard me talk about being a township supervisor and a state representative and some of those experiences. But one of the things I found really striking was that all that time as a township supervisor for 7 years and as a state rep for 2 years, and then a year into this campaign, I simply have hardly ever seen Representative Joe Pitts, my opponent. I've always known that he was the absent congressman, sort of disinterested and uninvolved, just as your cartoonist portrayed in the paper the other day. And it's really been striking to see on what I think is the biggest issue in this race, and that is dealing with this Williams Partners massive natural gas pipeline. It's really come to the front that just as I've known about Representative Pitts, that he's simply uninvolved and the absentee congressman, you can really see it with this issue. There's been multiple meetings, almost weekly, bi-weekly, since this happened. I think April, when I attended the county commissioner meeting when Williams had a chance to address the board, the commissioners. And I sat for 2 or so hours listening to countless residents talk about their fears and their anxieties and their concerns. And when I got into the room, as soon as the public comment period started, Tom Tillett, the chief of staff of Representative Congressman Pitts, got up and left before the first person even spoke. So not only did Representative Pitts fail to attend that crucial meeting, but his chief of staff got up and left as soon as it was time for the residents to voice their concerns. And that wasn't surprising to me, because as a township supervisor, we had a major issue, as I mentioned, in the bypass, and the debate about the bypasses, the potential bypasses to our township. And I was our township's executive board member for that issue for 18 monthly meetings over a year and a half. And not one time on the issue that was paramount in Chester County, not once did Representative Pitts show up. And he just became a congressman 5 or 6 years earlier. It was only Tom Tillett that we had the opportunity to address and talk to and lodge our complaint. So it's not surprising to me that with this issue here in Lancaster County, which, by the way, Lancaster County is 72% of the 16th Congressional District, it's not really surprising to me that Congressman Pitts has simply been absent. Even when FERC came to listen to the concerns of the residents, hundreds of residents there, he was nowhere to be seen. Which to me, even though I wasn't surprised, it's still astounding to me that he shows that little interest in being involved. Even if he supports the pipeline and he hasn't taken a position, he said he won't choose sides, at least be at these meetings to inform your constituents how to complain to FERC, how to write a letter to FERC. I mean, that's a process, and I remember being at these meetings and people were scared and nervous and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to go through the procedural process, the process of actually communicating with FERC. He should have had staff there. He should have been there explaining that process. And so I look at it as an abrogation, and a mission to act as a representative, and I think it's negligent. And so that's why I got in this race, and that was, I decided to get in this race 3 or 4 months before we even heard about this proposed pipeline. But the pipeline issue has really shown exactly what I knew all along, and that is that we simply don't have a representative who is interested in the issues that we're facing here in the 16th district. So that's why I'm running.
Let someone else ask a question, but as a township supervisor and then as a member of this, as a state legislator, have you taken a position on any pipelines before? Have you been involved in any pipeline efforts before? And if not, why this pipeline?
Well, first of all, when you run for an office, you have to represent your constituency. And to me, this, I guess it wasn't an October surprise, it was an April surprise. It was clear to me from the beginning, especially listening at that very first meeting of the county commissioners, watching, a large contingent of residents in Lancaster County. You can tell there were a mixture of folks who live in subdivisions and in cities, on farms, and it was clear that they had some major concerns. And to be frank, I didn't know, we certainly didn't have the resources to go out and do polling to see, okay, how does Lancaster County feel about this? I made my mind up right from the get-go. When I heard the testimony at even more meetings that, we were talking 42-inch high pressure, 2,000 PSI. That's pressure that Williams has never experienced. 2,200-foot blast zones, compressor stations with a half-mile blast zone. The fact that they can only tell if there's a leak if they do a flyover and spot dead vegetation. All those things that I heard at that very first meeting made it clear to me that this was a no-brainer. I didn't care about whether or not the polls showed, Lancaster County residents were in favor or against. I know it's a very conservative county registration-wise, and to be honest, I assumed that it would probably not be a good position initially to take, but we actually drafted our press release and sent it within minutes of leaving that county commissioner meeting, and I took a strong position against the natural gas pipeline, just knowing in my heart and my head that it was not the right thing to do. I mean, when you hear Governor Corbett say that his vision is to see a ladder or a spider web of pipelines throughout the southeast, throughout Pennsylvania, that's not what I envision for this Commonwealth. That's not what I want for the state, especially the southeast, where we value our farmland, the best soils on planet Earth, where we have the best schools in the country, where we have such a strong, vibrant community, especially when agriculture is the number one industry in the state. As a member of the House Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, I was proud that sponsored legislation that helped our farmers, and hearing them testify at the county commissioner meeting that they would cause great compaction to the soil, maybe lose access to parts of the ground. I mean, to me, it was a no-brainer to come out and take a stand and stand with the residents of Lancaster County. And it's not just about standing with the residents of Lancaster County. I see this as the first of many. So I've been telling our Berks County portion and Chester County residents of this district for the last 6-7 months that this is not just about Lancaster County, this is about southeast Pennsylvania. So to me, it was a no-brainer to come out and stand with the residents to oppose this pipeline.
Tom, I'm sorry. It seems to me and a lot of other people that FERC is going to do what FERC is going to do. On the front page of today's paper, we saw FERC give a friendly environmental report or finding on another Williams pipeline.
The constitutional
pipeline,
yeah.
And FERC even noted the potential, harmful environmental impact, but nonetheless gave it a friendly, report.
Yeah.
What is it you think you can do realistically if elected to, help ensure that either the project's not done, or if it is done, it's done in a way that doesn't impact?
Yeah, well, let me first say that I've made it clear, especially at one of the early Conestoga meetings Conestoga Information held a meeting at the firehouse in Conestoga, and I made it clear to the audience that any politician or anybody who stands up and promises to stop this pipeline is lying or pandering. So I've made that clear since day one. But I can only promise to stand with the residents of Lancaster County in opposing this pipeline. I heard the same thing back in 2001 when I was the first Democrat to run in London Grove Township since 1960. And the major issue was the threat of these two elevated bypasses, potentially 6 to 8 lanes. And all we heard was, well, it's a done deal. When the Federal Highway Administration and PennDOT gets behind these projects, it's a done deal. So I have to believe, as I said at the rally the other day that Lancaster Against Pipelines held, I have to believe that politics is a solution, that it can be a solution. I think we live in the greatest country on earth, and I believe that there is a political solution. And I believe that a candidate or an elected official can be a vehicle for a movement. And I have experienced that this year. We are in a movement. when you hear that Williams has been able to get access to 85% of the properties up and down this pipeline path, the 15% that they can't get on are residents of Lancaster County. So the residents of this county have taken a stand. And we actually were the first Democrats to win in my township over that bypass issue, and we won in a landslide. And that gave us a mandate to stop the bypasses, and we were successful in doing that. And now people are looking back and they're grateful because the residential market slowed, the traffic congestion has not really gotten worse, and we saved 300-year-old farmland and prevented existing homes from being demolished. And we also saved our commercial zone, which allowed us to get large-scale retail commercial, Lowe's and Acme, right in our township, that helped really provide some revenue to help lower the impact on the ever-rising property taxes. So that was a great victory, and I have a 10-point plan that we released this weekend. We had a town hall forum, and my 10-point plan goes from November 4th, step 1 is getting me elected, to step 10, which is me hiring an anti-pipeline coordinator as one of my main staffers in my office to make sure if I can't make an event, if I'm stuck in DC, that they will be there and actually be the liaison to all the 3 or 4 now anti-pipeline groups. And then in between, part of those steps, as I said, I believe there's a political answer to everything. So I will put pressure on all of my fellow congressmen-elect up and down the pipeline path from Luzerne County to Columbia down to Lancaster County to join me. And we will conduct rallies on the courthouse steps in each of their districts. And we will join with whatever opposition groups exist up there, and we will bus all of our great opposition groups here in the county, and we will have multiple rallies. And I will formally invite Senators Casey and Toomey, and any state reps, state senators, elected officials, and I know they're all relying on a cop-out that, well, this is a federal issue. I hear these township supervisors and elected state reps and state senators in Lancaster County saying, well, it's not my concern. Your first duty as an elected township supervisor is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of your constituents. And if someone's looking to put a 42-inch natural gas pipeline with a 2,200-foot blast zone and a half-mile blast zone for the compressor stations through my township, I'm standing up just like I did on the bypass issue. And the bypass issue was really just an example of eminent domain to take private land for public use, a highway. My opponent, who's supposedly anti-government, this could not be more hypocritical, as I pointed out in the debate. For him to not take a stand against eminent domain when it's a clear government overreach to take private land for the benefit of a private industry in Williams Partners, especially when they want to outsource or they want to sell the natural gas overseas, lowering supplies here, raising the price of natural gas here in PA while selling it 3 to 5 times the cost overseas, to me is clear hypocrisy.
I'd like to know if you are against drilling in the first place, and if you aren't against it, how do you plan for them to distribute and move the oil if you don't want the pipelines to go through southeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, as a member of the State House, as was mentioned, I was also a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and I fought hard with our caucus, not only on the severance tax. Texas, Louisiana, West Virginia, certainly no one would accuse them of being progressive or liberal states. They all have natural gas severance taxes. So I fought hard and passed 2 of those taxes out of the State House, which would have allowed us to actually have the revenue to actually enforce, hire adequate staff on DEP and actually enforce. I supported John Hanger's attempts to actually have strong enforcement of the gas industry. I was also proudly behind forcing the industry to disclose the cocktail, the fracturing cocktail that they inject into the ground to fracture up the rock and pull the gas up. I thought they needed to disclose the chemicals that they use for multiple reasons. Whether someone gets sick and we want to see if there's a correlation, or whether someone's groundwater gets polluted, we want to see, okay, could that have been from that nearby gas well? So I fought hard for those things, and we have the federal loopholes that my opponent support, the Halliburton loophole, which does away with needed regulation. In Harrisburg, it's been a disgrace to watch the fox guarding the hen house, so to speak. And under Governor Corbett, I'm certainly my position has been evolving. I've never come out against drilling. because initially, years ago, I looked at it as a bridge to the alternative energy transformation that we need to make in this country. And so I've never taken a stand against it. You know, we heard that it burned cleaner, and I'm certainly concerned about that issue with pollution and climate change issues. But to watch what's happening now in Pennsylvania and to see this Halliburton loophole, which gets rid of needed regulation, to allow to allow sham environmental impact statements, to not require erosion and sediment control when they construct the pipeline. I mean, we need to protect the Chesapeake Bay.
Would you support the pipeline if there was a severance tax?
No, absolutely not. The severance tax, could provide needed revenue to our general budget to allow us to actually adequately fund our schools, and that's one of the reasons we fought for it, because the more we give our schools, the less pressure on the school boards to raise our property taxes, and that is a major issue here in the Southeast. So that was my rationale behind the severance tax. But I see zero correlation between allowing this pipeline or disallowing this pipeline and the severance tax. There is an existing path, an existing right-of-way that Williams could use. I like to look at it almost like a D. This is the greenfield. This is the greenfield pipeline they're proposing through Lancaster County, but they have an existing path, an existing right-of-way they could use. And I don't know, but maybe some of those existing pipelines are old and could potentially be replaced. So they talk about the temporary jobs from installing a pipeline. Well, that's a longer path. You probably have more jobs, along with taking out any old or damaged pipelines and putting in the new ones, for the Oklahoma boys that are going to come up and work on the construction phase of the potential pipeline.
Thank you.
But if a pipeline was needed, and your rule seems to set up a NIMBY rule where we have concerns about it, we don't want it coming through here, we can stop it. I think that's why FERC is there. Do you think shipping it, by truck or train is safer than by a pipeline?
Well, when you're being asked to, or when you're pursuing an opportunity to represent the residents in the county, you have to ask, is this in the best interest of the residents of Lancaster County or in the, hello folks, or in the Southeast? And that's the main question. When I was told that we needed bypasses because Delaware residents needed to get through Chester County 2.5 minutes quicker. And I said, well, why can't you support the bypasses? Delaware residents need to get through Chester County 2.5 minutes quicker. I said, I'm running for township supervisor representing the best interests of the folks of London Grove Township. I would be abrogating my duties if I stood up for the residents of Delaware so they can get through my township quicker. If this was a pipeline that was bringing natural gas to the residents of Lancaster County so they could cook and have those energy, satisfy those energy needs, that would be a different equation. What's in it for Lancaster County? If they're looking to, Williams says send it 40% of this overseas. I actually believe it's going to be a much higher percentage of this. And then up and down the East Coast, what is in it for Lancaster County residents? So to me, you can call it NIMBY. When we heard that argument before, we were here first. You hear corporate polluters say things like that. We were here first, so you're just being NIMBYs. Well, now when the residents of Lancaster County are here first, and they want to run the pipeline through their properties, you don't hear that argument. And when you hear someone say, well, this is underground, so there'll be no infringement on your property rights, as I said at the debate, you can take a hypothetical. If Representative Pitts is looking, if I can help him retire, if he retires on his own accord in the future, and he's looking to move to Lancaster County, and he's interested in buying a 10-acre farmette, same house, same price, exactly the same, all else being equal, is he going to choose to buy the farmette in that 2,200-foot blast zone, or is he going to prefer the one that the realtor showed him 6 miles away? I think the answer is clear. I think everybody in this room would choose the one 6 miles away, as would Representative Pitts. So I didn't even get to the property value issue, the loss of property values. People in Lancaster County, in many cases, have their whole lives tied up in their land, whether it's a 10-acre farmette or a 200-acre farm, or it's a 1-acre house. All of their value, all of their assets are tied up in their land, and the property value hit, I think, is tremendous here. And so I'm proud to stand with the residents of Lancaster County in opposing this specific greenfield project when they have an alternative route that they could use.
Just so we don't talk about the pipeline the whole time, what are the, aside from the pipeline, what are the top 3 issues in this race?
Well, aside from the pipeline, as you'll see in my website, and as you heard discussed in the debate, jobs in the economy are huge. Anybody running for office right now that has witnessed, the stock market excel over the last 4 or 5 years. We've had 56 months of job growth, which is a record in the history of this country. Not everybody is benefiting. We still have wage earners, middle-class wage earners. The working class of America's wages have flatlined. We need to invest in our economy. We need to form relationships with the private sector to invest. We need to honor the American tradition of doing so, whether it's revitalizing our downtown centers to help create jobs, our infrastructure needs like our roads and our bridges and our sewage systems and our water systems, our transportation systems. We need to actually work in tandem with the government. If private sector is holding on to their revenue, as we see, they need to see that the government is interested in working with them and pursuing investment. We have some struggling cities in the 16th district. Lancaster City is clearly doing the best. But we have Coatesville and we have Reading, the second poorest city in the country. And if a business is looking to come to Pennsylvania or looking to come to the city of Reading, if they don't see that there's an equal desire on a government body to take care of roadways and bridges which look like they're going to fall over, and pothole filled roads, and there's no adequate sewage system, or store fronts are boxed up, they're not going to be too interested in coming there and helping to create jobs. So there needs to be a partnership. When I was a state representative, I saw the need. Our biggest employer, Sikorsky, had to pay a 6% sales tax on the sale of helicopters and helicopter parts. And so that was a government private enterprise partnership that we formed to find a solution for that. So I was proud to support and get passed a bill to alleviate them from that tax burden. They were the only state in the Northeast that had to pay that 6% sales tax. That was preventing them from bringing in 200 or 300 jobs. So yeah, we did lose $72,000 per year in the 6% sales tax from the sale of helicopter parts. But they promised that by alleviating that 6% tax, they would be able to bring in 200 or 300 jobs. And then so you look at the income tax that you're going to collect from those 200 or 300 workers, and that far outweighs, it was in the millions, it far outweighs the revenue that we lost from the sales tax. So I believe that we need to invest in our communities, and we need to kill two birds with one stone and invest in also alternative energy and green energy, and be the world leaders in making solar panels. I mean, Germany gets 75% of their electricity from solar, and so as we're spending $40 billion a year subsidizing the most profitable industry in the history of planet Earth, big oil and gas, we are wasting an opportunity to show that same support for the green sector. I also had legislation I had a chance to mention in the debate, and I'll end here, to allow large-scale landowners, albeit whether they're ag preserve or forest preserve, to contract with large-scale wind and solar companies to use a portion of their property to create that energy, to allow a farmer a chance to get some additional revenue to stay on the ground and not be knocked out of the Clean and Green program. Large landowners, for those that aren't aware, can roll in the 1974 Clean and Green legislation to get a property tax reduction to encourage them to stay on the ground and discourage them from selling out to a developer. Well, before my bill became law, if you put wind and or solar infrastructure on your farm, that's a change of use. You're knocked out of the Clean and Green program. So large landowners across the Commonwealth were deterred from doing so. And so I ran on a campaign to promote clean and green energy and provide support to farmers. So I was proud that law, that piece of legislation that became law, to allow the amendment to the Clean and Green law to allow for those types of relationships to exist.
So for infrastructure, would you favor raising the federal gas tax to pay for it?
Well, the last thing we want to do, excuse me, hold on. The last thing we want to do in an economy that I believe is still recovering is talk about raising taxes. So no, I'm against that at the moment. But budgets are about priorities, and when you're looking to superfund something like we did, I'm getting attacked on TV right now in direct mail from my opponent for shutting down the government when I was a state legislator. I think he's trying to make me look like an incumbent with the $25 billion shutdown that he was involved in last year. Governor Rendell wanted to get us historic increases in education funding. Again, short of property tax reform, which I certainly supported. The quickest way to reduce the pressure on our school boards from raising our property taxes is to increase education funding. Oxford had a 14 and 5% property tax hike. I've spoken with thousands of seniors who were actually choosing between buying adequate amounts of food and paying the property taxes. So investing in education funding was certainly paramount. And so we stood with the governor during that long budget delay. And at the end of the day, we got a $300 million increase and stayed true to the costing out study. That was a bipartisan costing out study in 2007 to bring Harrisburg from 33% funding of our schools up towards 50% funding of our schools, where we used to be in the early 80s. So I stood with the governor in getting that outstanding budget. At the end of the day, yeah, we were a few months late on passing the budget, but we won. And 2 weeks later, I sat at the Oxford School District meeting and heard the solicitor tell that school board that thanks to Governor Rendell and the House Democratic Caucus, after a 14 and 5% property tax hike here in the district, we will not have to raise the property taxes. So that budget gave Oxford the second largest increase in education funding out of 500 schools statewide. They got the third largest increase the next year. And Avongrove, where my children go, they got the 16th and the 19th largest increase out of 500 schools statewide. Thanks to that, it was my proudest moment in Harrisburg, was fighting for that budget. I'd rather have a late budget, a good late budget, over a bad on-time budget any day of the week. In Washington, they don't have budgets. They don't pass budgets, which is a sad thing. So in Harrisburg, we're constitutionally mandated to do so, and I could care less that we went 3 months late because of that issue. Yeah, I was concerned about some of the services that were getting cut off, and that was concerning. So strike what I said about caring. I did care, and it was a hard fought battle. But at the end of the day, I was sent to Harrisburg for my constituents to reduce the property tax burden. So I can tell you, as Governor Rendell and our caucus were getting pounded for that late budget, as we were standing up trying to get that $300 million increase, my constituents were not calling and complaining. They knew exactly what we were doing because that's what I promised to do when I was running for office. And now I'm watching me get attacked for providing historic increases to our four school districts in my district, Octorara and Coatesville as well. And so I'm proud of what we did there, and I would do it again in a second.
So where would you reduce federal spending? What line items or programs would you cut to fund infrastructure? You're not going to raise taxes.
Yeah, well, as I said, budgets are about priorities, and I'm not going to sit here and start naming line items. I mean, I have to sit and look at a budget. In Harrisburg, the budget was, 50 pages of legal-sized paper with 150 line items per page, and we would sit there and pore over it and literally go through and say, really, this program? And we would have a discussion on the merits of that program. What are the pros and cons? What are the strengths? What does this provide? So I'm not going to sit here and tell you what I would cut. I just know that whether we can pass a budget or not in Washington, it doesn't seem like they can nowadays because no one gets along. I would look at every program, as any of my supporters know, with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm fiscally responsible. I've been involved proudly in 9 balanced budgets, 7 as a township supervisor and 2 as a state representative, and budgets about priorities. So when we superfunded education $300 million, we had to look and cut other places. Now I'm being attacked now because there was a budget by Governor Rendell that we didn't support. The governor at the time was calling for smokeless tobacco tax, increase in earned income tax, and my caucus opposed that. We don't want to raise the taxes because we just had an economic collapse in 2009. And so I'm being attacked now for opposing, this bipartisan budget. That was not a bipartisan budget. It was clearly rejected. And so budget's about priorities, and if I believe we need to find ways to invest, I will then look at the ledger and find programs that are needless or ineffective, and I would balance the increased revenue on investing in our infrastructure in our communities. I would find somewhere where we could cut to balance that out.
Are there really no, coming back to that question, no areas of spending, either generally or specifically, that you haven't eyed as perhaps being ripe for cuts? I mean, most of us, I think, probably have programs that we've looked at and think, why are we doing that? Or there's general areas of spending that we would have issues with, and certainly by prioritizing and maybe I should answer this two different ways. I'd ask it that way, and then I would ask it in terms of, then what are your priorities? What are things that maybe you would go to the mat on, and what things would you not go to the mat on?
Well, of course, education is my priority. Trying to build an infrastructure to create jobs and the green infrastructure to lessen our reliance on the Mideast are all priorities. And Representative Pitts did a good job the other night in describing 7 or 8 programs that were absolutely absurd. And as you all heard, I agreed with him.
Mhm.
And I'd be proud to cut those silly programs that he talked about. So we all hear the stories about the $500 hammers in the Defense Department and the $8,000 toilet lids. So I'm someone that's very thorough as an attorney, and as I said, as a father raising 2 kids, and as someone who was proud to be a foster parent for 7 years in Chester County Health and Human Services. I'm someone who is Child and Youth Services. I'm someone who is very diligent and very budget oriented, and we need to cut where we need to cut. And I'm not going to sit here and list programs, but I can tell you I will go to the mat on education because our children are our future, and I don't look at education funding as spending. I look at it as an investment. And you hear school boards get beat up all the time, and it's true that the school boards do have some mandates. Large part of their budget are mandates. They get beat up when the property taxes get raised, and my response is always, well, we need to send more funds from Harrisburg to reduce the pressure. But all I know is that the school boards in my community in southern Chester County are very fiscally conservative, and they do a good job of cutting any fat or any waste. But when you're talking about class sizes, putting 32 kids in a class with a teacher, that's too much. I remember volunteering many times, and I remember one time I had responsibility of one table with 7 or 8 kids, and just for 20 minutes we had to draw my favorite person of all time, Abraham Lincoln. We had to draw his profile and his hat, and after 20 minutes I needed a rest. I needed a break. So I have incredible respect for teachers and the jobs they have to do. But I also know that we don't need 32 kids per class. And so as a congressman, I'll support the allocation that we make to our schools, because education funding to me is paramount if we want to compete in the 21st century.
You mentioned your experience as a lawyer. Your opponent keeps pointing to the contribution you've received from trial lawyers and your subsequent no vote on tort reform.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, he indicated $105,000. Made it sound like I got it this year. I think this year we probably have raked in maybe $2,000 or $3,000 from trial attorneys. That money was given to me, provided to me over 3 elections, 2006, 2008, and 2010. And I am someone that believes in consumer protection. There was a change made recently in Pennsylvania to the joint and several law, which I think was abysmal. If you have a young child that's sickened by a toy in a Happy Meal, and here was a Chinese manufacturer that produced this toy, and maybe it had a high content of lead in it, and McDonald's sold it, and your child was lead poisoned or something really, devastating happens to that child, and the family brings a lawsuit against the manufacturer, who happens to be a Chinese corporation, and the retailer, who happens to be McDonald's. If that Chinese manufacturer goes belly up, and that jury awards, even a jury in a conservative district or county like Lancaster or Chester County awards $10 million for the care of that child over the next 70 years as he's bedridden, maybe potentially partially brain dead or what have you, depending on the injury, that money will not be there because of the change to Pennsylvania's joint and several law. It's kind of too hard to get involved in, but that McDonald's will be left off the hook if that Chinese company goes belly up because of the change to our law. And now we're going to have to use social programs to fund for the care of that child instead of a corporation that can certainly afford to do so, like McDonald's. So if you ask, do I stand on the side of consumers when it comes to those issues, the answer is yes.
So you mentioned education as a priority. What's the federal role in education? Is it just sending money to the states?
Well, again, I also mentioned mandates, and the people that know how to educate our children are the ones in the local community, and I believe they know best. And I have a lot of faith in our school boards here in Pennsylvania to do that. And so we have to make sure that we don't put mandates, especially unfunded mandates, on the backs of our school boards as they're trying to educate our children.
So the federal role would be to send money and say, don't have 32 children per class. I'm just trying to...
The federal role would be to do everything we can to invest in our children to the fullest extent. So the school boards are not left with that decision to increase class sizes and fire teachers, so they have the adequate revenues to make that happen, or to avoid that from happening.
But would you put a mandate of a cap on class sizes with the federal money?
No, I don't think you can do that because sometimes school boards will be handcuffed and they got to do certain things. But as a state representative and state senator in Pennsylvania, I'm hoping that you are just as concerned about class size as I am. And so you have the opportunity in Harrisburg to get our funding up to 50% of the total funding that the schools get. They get about 45%. Well, they used to when it was 50% under Rendell. 45% of the funding came from our property owners, 50% came from Harrisburg, and about 5% came from the feds. So clearly our state legislature plays a large role in funding our schools, and our Constitution mandates that they provide for a good public education. And unfortunately, many on the other side of the aisle, some folks in the extreme side part of that party, aren't really big believers in that language in the Constitution in public education. I think public education is what allowed me to rise from an impoverished situation. My late mother was a waitress for 50 years. My dad split when I was 10 years old. I remember living without electricity at some points in my life. And despite that, I never missed a day of school from kindergarten through 12th grade, attending public school every single day. But for that opportunity that was given to me, I would not have been able to get through school and college and law school and have the opportunity to run for office in this great country.
The polls suggest that the Republicans are going to maintain control of the U.S. House and gain control of the Senate. It's likely then that the Affordable Care Act, that there'll be action to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Will you argue against such a repeal, and why are you a defender of the Affordable Care Act?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's definitely a strange position for me because my premiums did go up $200 a month as a result of the ACA. Although they were going up 9% a year anyway, as a result of being a self-employed attorney, because of uncompensated care. When you're sick, you go to and you have no insurance, you go to the hospital, or if you have a cough and you get treated, and so I think everybody has a right to do. And that uncompensated care was causing a 9% increase in premiums anyway. So the system was broken. President Obama's mistake was not to say, if you like your insurance, don't worry, I'm not going to touch it. His mistake, he should have been saying, if you like your insurance, guess what, it's broken. The premiums are increasing 9% a year. And then, ironically, the day before the debate, as you heard me mention, my wife received a letter indicating that we were being thrown off of our policy. So, I lost my job as a state representative because of the anti-ACA wave in 2010. And even though I was in Harrisburg, I had nothing to do with the passing of the legislation. And here I am several years later, having my premiums rise and losing our insurance. So I guess we have to enter into the pool. But
So far, you haven't made much of a case for it.
yeah, no, but you know what? Despite the fact that I've been personally harmed by it, I'm looking to represent my constituency, and the last thing I want to do is throw 10.5 million people. I can afford to go out and look in the market and try to see if I can get, we can get some luck and get some rates that are at least close to what we had. But there are 10.5 million people that need to see a doctor, and I think it's the right of every human being to be able to see a doctor. For my opponent to grandstand and vote 54 times to repeal the ACA, he needs to first answer this question. If there's a 9-year-old boy who has an appendix that's about to burst, and he could die, and he just happens to have no insurance, and he's rushed to the hospital, Joe, what do you do? There's the moral dilemma. What do you do? Do you send him home or do you treat him? If you treat him, that's uncompensated care. What do you do?
Wouldn't in Pennsylvania most kids be covered by CHIP anyway, and not the ACA?
Yeah, but this is a hypothetical. 9-year-old, so say it's a 30-year-old man with the appendix is about to burst. Until Joe Pitts can answer that question, I want to see him answer that question before he puts me on the spot for my position on the ACA. There are some things we need to fix in the ACA. Legislators not only introduce new legislation, as I've done in the State House, but we also introduce legislation to amend other legislation, existing legislation that may have had some unintended consequences, like the ACA, like the bad things that happened to me personally with the ACA, with my policy. Instead of grandstanding and getting nothing done for 4 or 5 years, maybe if my opponent was concerned about simply looking to fix the unintended consequences, we may not have lost my insurance. I may not have seen rates rise $200 a month. But instead, he's been politically grandstanding for all these years, just making these wasteful votes to repeal when everybody knew that wasn't happening with a Democratic administration. And the Supreme Court, who upheld the mandate, which, by the way, was a mandate supported by Mitt Romney and the Heritage Foundation and Bob Dole. conservative think tanks who felt that scofflaws were getting away. We talked about people going to the ER, and it cost all of us in the increasing rates because of uncompensated care. Well, that's a scofflaw. And so the reason conservatives supported the mandate was to not force them to get insurance, but if they don't get insurance and they go treat uncompensated care at a hospital, we need to hit them with a little tax penalty. And that's what the mandate is. So that's the idea behind it, and it's true that Hillary Clinton supported that in the 2008 debate, and President Obama, candidate Obama, did not at the time. But once he got in and he saw, you know what, the insurance industry said we cannot support covering folks with pre-existing conditions. We're going to need some more customers. And so when he heard that, you know, we need to make sure 26-year-old kids can have coverage and stay on their parents' policy. We need to make sure 80% of the revenue into the healthcare system is spent not on overhead, but spent on actually treating patients. When he saw all those constraints on the industry and all the requirements, he then came around after he got elected to realizing that the Heritage Foundation, Bob Dole, Mitt Romney approach was the best approach. Do I think it's the best approach? Maybe not. I mean, I think personally President Obama should have used all that political capital from that election, especially since we had a struggling economy with the second worst recession/depression in the history of the United States. And he could have led us on a killing two birds combination of creating jobs and lessening our reliance on the Mideast by becoming a world leader in green energy and alternative energy. And that, I felt, should have been the path that he could have taken back in 2009. Monday morning quarterback, looking back, that would have been a much wiser move by the administration.
While we're on the subject of healthcare, do you support Governor Christie and other governors' efforts in the past week or so to impose mandatory quarantines for healthcare workers returning from West Africa? And is that something, do you think that the House now is failing in its response to Ebola?
My friends on the progressive side of the aisle, my supporters, are a little upset at me at this, but I do. I mean, I do support that move because, as I said, health, safety, and welfare is the primary concern. And we're not talking quarantine in a jail cell. We can certainly have comfortable surroundings for those that are returning. And yeah, there is a concern about discouraging the heroes that we have that want to go overseas and go to West Africa and help solve the problem at its source. You will deter some of those folks if you say you're going to come back and be quarantined. But I think they have to understand that it has to be part of the process. If they're going to go over and put themselves in danger, they could potentially put us in danger too. So I do support a quarantine just to make sure they get through before they're going bowling in their community and taking the subway like that one doctor in New York. So yeah, I do support that, and I do think I do support Congress's efforts there if they make that effort.
I'm sorry, can I ask another question? You were significantly outraised by Representative Pitts.
Yeah.
Your election odds are long.
Well, I disagree with
That's
that,
fair
but
to say?
okay, yeah.
Well, I guess my question is, are you taking one for the team here?
Not at all. And anybody who
Are you
knows me
ready?
knows I don't do this stuff lightly. As the first Democrat to run for township supervisor in 41 years, I won a race knowing I was going to win, and we did in a landslide. And it turned out that was 3 times the county average. I was the first Democrat, and I was reelected, by the way, in a heavy Republican township in a landslide 6 years later so that should tell any Republicans out there that I'm someone who is not a partisan hack, that I do what I believe in, and I do what I think is right. And I was the first Democrat ever elected to the 13th legislative district. And it's true that I got into this race assuming that it would be easier to raise money. I raised more money as a state house candidate. I raised as much in my first run in 2006 from a room full of Republican land conservationists. I raised $40,000 in one night in 2006 because of my record as a supervisor in saving our ag zone. And that was as much as was ever raised against Representative Art Hershey in his 24-year career. And I did it before I even got on the ballot. And so I had a much easier time, even from attorneys. Attorneys are more concerned about Harrisburg than they are D.C. with the tort laws. Some of those things, like George Strawbridge is a large landowner Republican I just mentioned. I got hit the other night in a debate for accepting $30,000 from him. Representative Pitts just mentioned I took 30 grand from someone. That was George Strawbridge, who supported me because of my ideals on land conservation and my ideas to change our municipal planning code to give towns more control over zoning so we can more adequately save our farmland. But yeah, I mean, I knew it would be difficult, but sometimes things happen in campaigns that really change the game, and that is this massive issue with the natural gas pipeline. And fortunately, I happen to be on the right side of the issue, which, if you look at the district, we know we're going to win Berks County by 8,000 to 10,000 votes. We know we'll win my old House seat, which now has Coatesville added to it in the new maps that came out. We know we'll win Cheshire County by maybe 1,000 votes, maybe 1,500 votes. And that's conservatively, based on conservative projections. And right now, the proposed pipeline happens to be running through the reddest region of the entire 16th district. And people are upset. People are really angry at Representative Pitts. And so what was going to be the reddest region of our district in terms of looking at the post-game analysis, we think may be purple or even blue. And so that's a game changer. And it has been frustrating trying to make national folks look at this race and show interest. But we feel differently. We feel very confident, despite the fact that we're outraised 10 to 1. All of our money came from individuals, except for a few PACs. Representative Pitts is, it's part of what's going on right now in Washington. It's part of the problem. He's taken so much money from special interests. It's absurd. He doesn't. I called him the absent congressman in terms of being in his district to see how his constituents feel. I bet he doesn't even have to pick up the phone to raise those funds. I mean, he's just pretty much being bought and sold.
You mentioned
Okay.
10.5 million people getting health insurance, health coverage, and then you said President Obama should have spent his political capital on green energy and alternative energy instead. So should he have not done the Affordable Care Act?
The irony is that even with the ACA, we're going to have 30 million uninsured. So we need to do more. And even though it's a great thing that 10.5 million people got covered, the last thing I want to do now that they are covered is rip that coverage away from them. What I'm saying is, at the time when President Obama was elected, we were in a free-for-all. He swore in January 2009, we were shedding 700,000 to 800,000 jobs per month. And I think his first move, although I believe that people should have a right to see a doctor and we should have universal coverage, I think his approach to tackle the healthcare issue, which has been an issue for 100 years in America, his strategy to attack that first while we were losing 700,000 to 800,000 jobs a month, I thought was wrong place and mistimed. I thought he could have brought the country together by pushing for and pursuing, again, killing two birds in one stone, I keep using that phrase, but we could have told Republicans, support me on this so we can lessen our reliance on the Mideast. We could have told environmentalists, hey, let's lower the impact of carbon emissions on our planet. And he could have told everybody else that was worried about the shedding of jobs, we're going to start a new sector. We're going to start manufacturing in America again. And we could have raced China and become the world leaders in green energy and killed 5 birds in one stone. So because I said that doesn't mean I don't think that it's a good thing that we're covering Americans, but we still are going to have 30 million Americans uninsured. And that's a problem.
So should he have done universal coverage?
Well,
Single payer.
Medicare for all, Medicaid for all. Should he have done that? I mean, he certainly didn't have the political will to do that. I mean, you saw he just wanted to get a portion of it with a public option, and that got beat down. And so I'm not hitting him on not pushing for that because it was hard enough to get this Mitt Romney type coverage, in the United States. So I'm not saying that he should have even been more aggressive because we all saw how hard it was to get done what he got done. And 10.5 million Americans now are able to see a doctor because of what he did. So I'm not slamming him for what he did, but I am Monday morning quarterbacking, saying if I could go back, I do wish he would have taken the manufacturing, green energy type, create jobs approach, economy approach. Not only because I loved being a state representative and I got swept out of office because of the anti-ACA backlash. That would be selfish if that was the only reason that I was upset about what he did. But now looking back, it may have been a good thing, especially when we see flat wages and we see still joblessness, even though the unemployment rate has ticked down. It would have been a better thing, I felt. I feel now looking back, if he would have tackled the economy First, and let's face it, the economy was suffering too because of the rising healthcare cost. And at least now we're seeing, for the first time ever, a slowing in the rate of healthcare expenditures. Healthcare cost, the rate is slowing. So yeah, that's probably part and parcel to the recession, but it's probably also to some of the programs that have been instituted with the ACA.
You talked about Congressman Pitts, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
accepting special interest money.
Okay.
Aside from your acceptance of money from trial lawyers, which, I think they're the biggest lobby in Washington, correct? Are you willing to...
By the way,
Okay,
the
I'm just-
trial lawyers in Washington have not given me a dime.
Right.
But
That's
anyway,
fine.
go ahead.
Are you willing to say that from here on out, you will not accept special interest money from PACs going forward, if you're elected?
No, because for instance, I accepted money from the teachers union because I believed in funding education to reduce the property tax burden. So I was proud to get that support as I was going up against opponents who were taking money from big oil and big
Right,
gas.
but that's a special interest.
Exactly, and you asked
Okay.
if I
Well, you just criticized the congressman for accepting a lot of special interest money.
from special interests that I
That
believe...
you don't agree with, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
don't have the best interest of this country at heart. So yeah, I didn't exactly attack him because he's taking money from PACs, because I have as well, but I take money from PACs who stand for the things that I think are important.
Because again, you described him as having been bought and sold, and his campaign would counter, well, you did vote no on tort reform after getting support from the trial lawyers. How do you defend yourself against the bought and sold?
And by the way, do you know what tort reform that I voted against? Because I can't remember a tort
Okay.
reform vote.
No, that was one of the questions that we received.
Yeah, and my 2 years in the State House, we didn't have any tort reform legislation that was in front of me. Number one. But what was the rest of the question?
You described him as having been bought and sold. How do you counter that when
Well-
it's levied against you?
Well, first of all, when the biggest issue in your district is whether or not to oppose the Williams pipeline, and you've accepted $15,000 from that company, that's a little bit of a conflict of an interest. That's even more than an appearance of a conflict of interest. And so I would hope that he would send that money back before Election Day to Williams. Explain, what are you trying to...
I just, again, how do you counter this? He would counter, again, your support while you were in the House from the Travelers Association.
Well, first of all, I don't think there were any votes on
Right.
any tort reform, but again, I'm in Harrisburg fighting to increase education funding, and the teachers union is supportive of candidates who want to do that to benefit our 500 public schools. So, I was proud to accept their support in my campaigns for State House, if that's what you're getting at.
I have another question about the pipeline.
Shoot.
Again, FERC is going to make this decision.
Yeah.
Representative Pitts would say, well, he has experience on the committee that oversees FERC, that he's better placed to shepherd people's concerns to FERC.
Mhm.
What do you say to that? And how do you counter this, the reality that he has a lot of experience in Washington, he has some position, he sits on a committee. How do you counter that? Going up against?
I believe that an incredibly high percentage of Lancaster County residents oppose the pipeline. So when Representative Pitts says, well, you need me to be there in Washington because I have oversight of FERC, that's exactly the person that Lancaster County residents don't want to have oversight of FERC. Because, it's clear, he hasn't come out and said, well, I support the pipeline or I'm against it, but he said he is not choosing sides. That would be like, I'm 6'2", 185 pounds. That would be like me walking into a room and seeing an NFL player about to beat up a 10-year-old boy. And then me turning around and walking out and saying, well, I'm not choosing sides. Well, yeah, I am. By not getting involved, I just allowed that 10-year-old boy to get beat up by that NFL football player. All the marbles are in the pockets of Williams partners. And for Joe Pitts to say he's not choosing sides, he is choosing sides. He's doing it indirectly, and he's trying to be sly, but he is choosing sides. And so he's the person, if you oppose this pipeline, he is the person that we do not want to have oversight of FERC. No doubt about it, especially someone that's taken $400,000 from the oil and gas industry in his time in Washington.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Karen, anything else?
No.
Do you have anything you want to say by way of summary?
Well, first of all, it was a lively debate. I love the questions. Thank you very much. I had a blast also at the debate last Tuesday night at the Ware Center. And the folks that were there and those who saw it online and the ones who are looking today and watching in today, there's a clear choice in this election. No matter what any folks who oppose me in my time as a township supervisor or a state house member, they may have opposed me because, well, I didn't like the way you stood on this issue or that issue, but there's not one person that knows me in Chester County where they watched me operate for 9 years. There's not one person who can say that I'm not in this for the right reasons. As a township supervisor for those 7 years and a planning commission member, there were many nights, probably 3 or 4 nights per week, where I was away from 7 o'clock at night until maybe 11 o'clock at night, midnight, as my wife was putting my daughter down to bed and my young son a few years later, and there's nothing I love more than doing that. And so they were big sacrifices I made. And that's because at the time our township was facing incredible issues that I won't bore you with now. And being on the campaign trail for the last year, just this weekend, my son did something that I love more than anything, as my manager knows, is watching him play baseball, and I couldn't be there. And I was bummed all day and mad at him all day, but I couldn't be there. And so I don't take this decision lightly. When I decide to throw my hat in the ring, hey, listen, I know that Representative Pitts has been in for 42 years, State House and Congress. And so I don't throw my hat in the ring lightly when I decide to do something. It's, I do what I believe in. And I remember when I had to get up to hit doors one time, I was feeling sorry for myself, laying in bed, I'm not doing it. My daughter came in the room, grabbed me by the wrist and said, "Come on, Dad," and she ripped the blankets off and said, "Get up and get dressed and go hit doors." And that told me, you know what, I'm not just doing this for the residents of the area, I'm doing it for my kids too. And so I think we have so many issues in this country, and independents, Republicans, Democrats are all so sick and tired of the headbanging that goes on in Harrisburg and Washington. And there's one thing that I did, and you can even talk to Representative Brian Cutler about this here in Lancaster County. We may oppose each other on the House floor, but we're friends and we got along and we worked together. I remember one time getting Brian a hearing. He wanted a hearing on an issue that he was really concerned about. And I went to my chairman of the Ag and Rural Affairs Committee and I got him that hearing. And I stood and sat next to Brian at the table, Representative Cutler at the table, and participated in the hearing because I supported the legislation as well. And that legislation allowed, I mentioned clean and green, while schools get less revenue from those large landowners because the large landowners aren't paying all that revenue into the pot. And so Representative Cutler had a bill to increase the percentage of revenue that Harrisburg would have to refund those school districts. And I supported that wholeheartedly. And so I stood with Representative Cutler and fought for that legislation because I thought it was important, but B, I wanted my residents to see that, I'm not afraid to be seen on video camera with a Republican working things out to try to get things done. And we don't see that at all. I don't know if it's a 24-hour news cycle where Democrats were afraid to be seen with George Bush, and now Republicans are afraid to be seen with any Democrats or the president. But we have to end that. We have so many issues right now in this country, and I'm someone that I could care a lick about what party you're from. If you're on the right side of an issue and you're willing to work with me to help my constituents and to help this country move forward, even Republicans who oppose me over issues back home know that I'm the guy that will stand and work with anybody to get anything done. And that's why primarily I'm running. We need someone that can bring us into the 21st century where, we're 14 years in and I don't think we've got here yet.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. My pleasure.